I read something recently and it says the confused mind says no. If we're not translating and speaking to our community in a way that we understand, then this moment is just going to pass us by and we're going to be in a similar situation with the wealth gap as we've been in for the past few decades, right?
All right, everybody, what's going on? Super excited here for another episode. Of course, at Black and Meta, we're super excited to just share the perspective, the insight, all of the above with brilliant minds across the globe who know so much about what we're doing and are just here to share the insight with you so we can get up to speed and up to date about what's happening. So I'm super excited about my guest that's here today. This man is a marketing genius, brilliant mind. I mean, he knows so much of what we're doing in this space. And I'm just super excited to have him. Of course, his background, everything from the MBA to now at Meta, and he's got his own startups and things that he's advising and founder of. And so, look, I am just geeked to share his story, share his insight, and of course, introduce him today. So none other than Mr. Ryan Boyd. Ryan, what's going on? Happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll definitely cash app you later for that intro. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Super excited to talk about this. I think that this is something that is needed. So I appreciate you for creating this platform.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I just feel like it's been a long time coming, right? We've all seen this space happen in the background, but now that we're here, it's important for Black and brown faces to be at the foreground as well, too. So let's start with your story, Ryan, right? You're here, you're getting ready to fast forward us and give us all the insight and the gems. But before we get to that, let's take the story back. Talk to us about how you even got into tech. Is it something that you've just been tinkering with? Did somebody introduce you? Was it just a natural path through your career? Talk to us and rewind the tape about how all of this kind of started for you in the foundation.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of innovation. Even though my background has primarily been in sports and entertainment for the last, 12 years, I'm dating myself. But I've always looked at innovation and technology as the way forward. That passion kind of really collided with entrepreneurship back in 2017. I, at the time, started a startup that was in travel tech, but at the same time, I was starting to tinker with Bitcoin and understanding how this new financial model would change our world. From there, I was introduced to the blockchain and how decentralization will impact us in the future. And so that was the start of my journey.
Real quick, Ryan, before we go forward, unpack that. When you say you were tinkering with or were introduced to, I know you said you're interested in innovation is just a part of your DNA. Why that? Why was that kind of a key point that was happening with your startup?
It's so funny because the way I was introduced to Bitcoin, I tell this story sometimes and I laugh because I was at a party in Harlem and literally it's probably like 1 a.m. and it's a house party. And so there's an outside deck and then, so there are people outside kind of gathering, but there are also people just inside. And I'm like, what's this conversation? Why is everyone crowding this couch? And there's just one guy just sitting there and he's sharing, hey, there's this innovation called Bitcoin. You should look into it. And mind you, this is, December 2016. There wasn't really a news cycle. The exchanges weren't really carrying Bitcoin at the time. So it kind of, my first thoughts was, who is this guy, right? Like, what is he talking about? And I'll never forget, probably about 6 months later, I'm getting off of the plane and getting in a cab. I forget where I was coming from, but I'm heading back into the city. And the news station was playing how Bitcoin was now jumping to 19,000. And all I could do was just drop my jaw and say, oh my God, 6 months ago, this was less than $10,000.
Right.
So what is this asset? And so that from there, I just started doing my own research. And what I ended up finding was this new financial model, especially, and we'll dig deeper into this as Black and brown people, what does this mean for us? But I saw a new financial system that could now help us impact the biases that we see in our current financial system, from everything from loans and DeFi and how the structures work in DeFi and so forth. And so I immediately was able to identify that this would be a game changer and wanted to do a little bit more research.
So powerful. I want to just highlight a couple pieces that you're saying in your story. And one was that you were exposed very organically, but what you did, it sounds like, is that you took the information once you heard it again and did your own research. I think you said that, right? And I want to put a pin in that just for a second, because for those who are listening right now, like that's the thing right now. You've got to take the time to understand it. So I don't want you all to miss what Ryan is saying, because that's pivotal. That's important that we don't just see these things and they don't just gloss over, but we take time to understand that. I love that. I want to get back to the bias part later in our conversation, but fast forward us now to where you are, right, Ryan? So you find out about it in 2016. Here we are, almost close to a decade later, pushing to almost a decade later, right? How do we even get to the point where you say, you know what, this is something that I'm learning and I'm researching and I understand, to this is something that I'm going to actually engage with, right? What's the bridge there, and what happened for you?
Yeah. So, again, understanding what like a redistribution of power, finances, what that can do and how that can impact us. It took a few years to really figure out, okay, what is my moment of participation here, and like, how can I be impactful? Still figuring a lot of that out because the space is so nascent. We don't really understand all of the use cases. But what I've been spending a lot of my time doing is understanding how we onboard Black and Brown communities. I feel like onboarding is right now really the biggest impact, because we learn from being able to touch and feel and understand experiences. So I've been working with a lot of projects from the Ethereum Foundation to other like protocols, and understanding like, where can I add my value and how can we bring this to diverse communities to make sure that they're being seen and also being engaged with. I read something recently and it says the confused mind says no. If we're not translating and speaking to our community in a way that we understand, then this moment is just going to pass us by, and we're going to be in a similar situation with the wealth gap as we've been in for the past few decades, right? So I think right now the biggest piece that it can be and most important is education. So spending my time educating, spending my time just spreading the word of like these are the ways that this technology will change the world.
I love that. The confused mind says no. That's so good. That's so good on so many levels, because I think it unpacks and really gives language to what people are feeling and experiencing when they don't go do their research and don't go, excuse me, do their homework. Ryan, I want to kind of talk for a little bit, even as we get ready to transition to what are these things, and definitely want to hear your definition and right how you are able to experience it and articulate it. But when I think about this bias, I want you to just unpack that a little bit more for us, because I think it possibly could go over someone's head who doesn't quite understand the DeFi, doesn't quite understand the traditional pieces or the stuff that's like ingrained in our culture that we just overlook every single day, right? So talk a little bit about that before we transition into the meat of it, of like why this is so important for you, and why we really have to pay attention in that way.
Yeah, I think that we could talk about this all day. It can be complicated, but what I like to do is point to a few of the problems that exist today. I think a lot of us have recently seen some of the bias that in buying a home, right? In getting financing for a home. In some Black and Brown communities, we are devalued, or even in the community that we're occupying at that moment. Because we are there, then we're not getting the same opportunities. We're getting higher mortgage rates. We're getting declined at a much higher rate. So I think the opportunity that DeFi now gives us is to kind of own our own financial model, but also leap over those biases, right? They don't look for the same personal data that some of these traditional loan applications may ask for. So I think this is an opportunity for us to understand how we own our money, right? How do we own our own personal finances and our wallet? So I think that as this space grows more, we have to have a broader voice in how it's built out and the protocols in place.
Is it safe to say, Ryan, that this is an economic pathway for us, for Black and Brown people?
Absolutely. We can get into NFTs, we can get into the whole ecosystem, but essentially over the last 10 years, there's been a new asset class introduced. And widespread, we are a very, very small portion. So if we can continue to expand that asset class and be contributors, I think that this could be the quickest acceleration to wealth that we've seen in the last 100 years.
Wow. Wow. I wish we could go there for like the entire time, but it's such a light bulb moment because that's pivotal for something for that to be a conversation happening right now, right here in our lifetime. It is setting us up for, I believe, generations to come. And to your point, we've got to take advantage of the opportunity. So let's switch for a second, right? So I think at this point, anyone who's maybe listening for the first time, we're convinced like this is something that we need to pay attention to. How would you then explain these things? Like in your words, right? How do you explain Web3 or the ecosystem that's happening? I love how you said the new asset classes. Talk to us about, in just simple terms, from your perspective and your vantage point, what the heck is the metaverse, Web3, and the ecosystem of NFTs that's happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way that I like to explain the metaverse in general is the kind of the next phase of the internet, right? Like the new iteration. We've gone through multiple phases of the internet, and so the development cycle is kind of at a new pivotal point that will change the way that we engage with the internet, right? So, again, we talked about the ecosystem. The metaverse is just one phase of that. But out of that, I think the metaverse probably has the most potential to be widespread, especially as we see projects like Decentralization or Roblox or whatever the case may be. These new virtual worlds are coming, and they're providing a new way of engagement, but they're also democratizing data. They're also democratizing access. So, I think that there's just a lot of use cases, as I said before, that we haven't really figured out yet, but the possibilities there.
So you mentioned DeFi, right? And you and I understand what that means with decentralized finance, but talk about that particular use case. I think what I'm hearing, and even as we're going through this conversation today, that sounds like it's something that's really important for our community to understand. Can you talk about any specific use cases? I think you mentioned buying a home, but even some other use cases or some interesting projects or some things that you're finding that someone who's just hearing this stuff for the first time can really wrap their mind around DeFi.
Yeah. So by no means do I have a financial background, but I like to give a few examples, right? Over the last few years, Robinhood as an exchange has popularized trading, right? A few years ago, I want to say now, there was the AMC boom, right? If we all were paying attention, when they were halting trading and so forth, they ran out of liquidity was the real issue. They had to go back and ask their financial institution, hey, can we release more liquidity? Because we're seeing unforeseen trading patterns, and it's causing us to lose a lot of liquidity. That is an example of a traditional exchange. Now in Web3, we have what is called DEXs, which are a part of decentralized finance. And instead of a exchange going and asking a bank, this exchange has a liquidity pool where people who are adding to the liquidity pool are essentially the bank for this DEX, this decentralized exchange. So now, instead of one centralized bank seeing the upside of that, now that's widespread and distributed through the community of people who are participating in that liquidity pool. So there's a new way and a new form of building wealth passively, but as well as aggressively, now being created through these decentralized exchanges. So Uniswap is probably one of the more popular ones. They're doing a lot of work in the space and building out how these DEXs actually work and like how these liquidity pools can become more effective and widespread.
What's the first step, Ryan, that someone takes to be in, whether it's engaged in DeFi, start a organization? Where does someone literally start with saying, okay, I hear Ryan and he's dead on, makes sense, I got it, but where do I start? Where do I even go to even find a project that I'm interested in?
I found all of my information on YouTube. It's all there, not to sound like a YouTube advertisement, but I guess, the biggest piece of it is that the information is out there, and it's not as easily accessible as a traditional banking system because, again, this space is really starting to build out, but we're seeing companies that are popping up every day that are helping to make it a little bit easier to, whether that is use your Bitcoin as collateral, right? Bitcoin is seen as a store of value. So if I have X amount of dollars in Bitcoin, I can now use that Bitcoin as collateral for my loan in a DeFi space, right? And so now the only thing that they're really looking for from a collateral perspective is knowing that the money's there. They're not worried about who I am, what race am I, what demo in general I am. And so that is the revolutionary part of smart contracts, right, which are part of the blockchain. There is a trustless system. So now having this trustless system, we can now better access financial tools that we haven't been able to access prior.
I love it. I love the innovation of this. I think it's obviously something that's here to stay, and it gets us excited, right? And I hope that y'all are listening, are catching the excitement, because it really is here to stay. You mentioned earlier about the metaverse and even how that is something that is evolving, but here to stay as well too. I would love to hear your thoughts and your take on the ecosystem and how all of these things work together. What are you seeing, right? Even maybe what are you predicting, and what's exciting to you to know that we've got this metaverse space, but then, it could plug into NFTs or connect with cryptocurrency. What's your excitement and what you're seeing in the metaverse space as it relates to what we're discussing now?
Yeah, I'm really excited. For one, I'm loving that we're now coming to a place in a part of the ecosystem, right? NFTs, where like culture is at the intersection of that, right? Because I think that as many people that are starting to inquire about this space, they'll start to learn more as I did, right? What excites me the most right now is DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations. I think that DAOs better represent, the full structure of Web3, right? Where that's ecosystem, tokenomics, community, right? So it is something that I think that as more people start to wrap their head around, it will be revolutionary, because we'll start to see the power that a decentralized community could bring. And when I say that, I'll use it for an example. The Constitution DAO. If you remember the news cycle about 6 months ago, there was a group of people who wanted to bid on the Constitution. They raised upwards of $50 million under this DAO, and they had one goal in mind. And if they would have won that Constitution, all of the community members would have had their own equity stake in owning the Constitution, right? So I think there's a big shift in how we raise money from a community, but also how we give power and governance, right? Because the way that DAOs are structured gives you the power to vote for rights, make decisions within your DAO as well. So, that's probably where I'm focused the most right now.
I want to unpack this and go deeper with the DAOs, because like you, I equally have this interest in how it's moving and how it's changing the way that we traditionally do things. Give us some examples, Ryan. Traditionally, when we look at, how we do life, work, business, etc., and then if you can even compare it to how it may be different for a DAO, right? Put it in some use cases for us, so someone who is hearing but doesn't quite understand the similarities or even how it's going to replace some of the traditional pieces, we can wrap our minds around it.
Yeah, so I mean, the essential point of a DAO is to really decentralize the power within an organization and give the contributors that one-to-one vote, right? So if I'm holding, you may have seen Bored Ape Yacht Club, they released the ape token, right? The thought behind that is, now that I own, not only am I a part of this membership community through my digital representation, the NFT, but I also now have governance through the token that I own. And also I power my ecosystem through this token as well. So it translates to also to Black and Brown community. So imagine if we came together and had one goal in mind as a community and said, hey, we're going to put our funds together, and through this community, we're going to be able to vote, use our governance rights on the things that are important to us, and through that treasury, release funds, right? So that's something that we really haven't been able to do on a large scale before. And I think is a really big idea as we talk about different segments that we can impact.
So the idea of the DAO and the tokens and so on, it's like you said, I think it's replacing raising money. Would this be equivalent to what traditional VC funding or raising startup money would be?
In a way, I think we've seen crowdfunding in the past. So I think this is more of a way that equity is now more accessible. and provable through, being able to be on the blockchain. You can see that I now have this ownership. So, I think VCs are looking at it in an interesting way as well, because governance is really about how you build the structure of your community, right? So if I'm building a DAO, I have the ability to show like who has voting rights and how they're able to vote. So, you would like to think that there is some sort of equality in that, as these DAOs are being built. But I think VCs are paying a lot of attention to the space, because it is a new way that you can start to think about how you contribute to a community or a project, that has potential upside that is very easy to see as well.
So it sounds like we're dealing with two parts. We're dealing with the governance part and being able to manage, right, shared control, if you will. And then we're also dealing with the funding piece as well, too, where there's, as you said, a treasury, there's money there to actually execute and do things in the respective spaces. Are we getting that right?
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. I know those that are listening right now, if they're anything like I am and interested, definitely want to go deeper with this, Ryan, right? So really quick, before we transition out of this conversation, any DAOs that are interesting to you? I know you said the Constitution was one that was interesting, but anything else that you can share with our audience to say, hey, check this out or look at this, just to at least get a better understanding of how this works?
Yeah. So just given my background in sports, one that caught my attention and really got me interested in DAOs was the Kraus House DAO, which is essentially a community of people who came together to, they wanted to buy a minority stake in an NBA team, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, really the sky's the limit if they can get across this. So I think what they're doing is really, really impactful. And understanding how those structures are built, I think we're looking at some of the foundational companies as kind of the model, but also we're starting to refine that model better as well. We're working on something internally, and when I say we, a group of people, a group of friends and I, on what we call the HBCUDAO. We think that we have an opportunity to impact how the HBCU community is governed, and be able to also give funding and our thoughts and our contributions back to the community, and give us the opportunity to now start taking back some of the ownership rights, whether that's through our collegiate sports or whether that's through our educational resources. So we're thinking through how that can be impactful on a wide scale to HBCUs broadly, but also just the financial and educational model of institutions.
This is so good. And you're HBCU alum, right?
Yes, Hampton University.
Hampton, the other HU. We won't go there right now, but yes.
I know I get it.
I love it though, man. And just amazing. Congratulations and just kudos to all the work that you're doing for us, for our communities. And even in this space, we know that it's all still evolving, but just to hear that you're doing work at the front end for our community. Thank you for what you're doing. Brian, we've talked about DeFi, we've talked about the metaverse, we've talked about now DAOs. How does somebody find their footing, right? There's so much to this space. What is your take and what is your insight or even advice for someone listening right now? They're like, oh my gosh, between crypto and between, blockchain and the metaverse and NFTs and Web3 and all of the things, how do I find my space? Where do I go or where do I start to really get a grip on what's happening? And then here it is, also leverage it for what things are that I'm passionate about or that I can be able to use for my business, et cetera. Where does somebody start?
Yeah, so the funny thing is that a lot of the thought leadership lives on platforms like Twitter or Discord. But I love the work that a friend of mine is doing. Her name is Simone Banna, and she runs a collective called the Friendly Black Hotties. So she dropped an NFT, to your digital representation. And these are representations of Black women in Web3, right? Which I think is so impactful. But she's also concurrently running curriculum, right? So education, teaching about investing in the Web3 space, and then the ecosystem in general, right? Again, going back to that onboarding is so important. So I forgot to mention, that's one of probably my favorite projects as well. But I think that those aspects of it will become so important as we talk about how we translate to the Black and brown communities, right? Like we have to figure out how we translate in a way that's impactful and meaningful to us. So, I think that being able to go into places like Twitter and start to unpack and find your community is impactful. Again, Discord channels, we'll be dropping the HBCUDAO Discord. This is a place where we all come together and we talk about the things that are important to us as a community, right? And then being able to share and figure out how we execute and manifest those things to life.
Got it. I love that. I love that. I think it's so important to be where the information is at, and you're giving us the plug and the play, right? And there's so many different places from YouTube and Instagram and Twitter, et cetera. But I think you're right, right? In this space, there is something special happening on Twitter and in the Discords. And so as y'all are listening, right, Ryan is giving us the play. Definitely brush off your Twitter if you haven't, or at least sign up and snoop and learn so that you can be able to be educated. This is what is so important for us to participate, is that we first understand and are educated so we can know not just the technology, but the terminology, and can participate in what's happening. Ryan, we're getting ready to wrap up here in just a few, but I do want to make sure that we take time to even unpack anything else that you're passionate about. And or I'll say it this way, that our community is Black and brown, and just really either getting started or between beginner and novice, right, in this space. What do you wish maybe you would have done differently? Or is there any path that you would have wanted to learn more about or go deeper in? Now rewind the tape, 3-4 years ago, and maybe give some insight to our audience.
Yeah, look, I think we all wish we could go back and say, hey, I invested more in some of these currencies that are now surging in price. But the thing that I'm really trying to spread the gospel and let people know that, like, we're so early, right? We're so early that it's really hard to be regretful of anything because there's so much in front of us. So I'm really focused on putting more of my thoughts in action, because this is a blank canvas for us right now, right? We're starting to see certain Web3 terms be popularized, right? Whether that's metaverse or NFT, but really understanding the utility behind what this actually means and what this moment is, I think is so important, and even why you built this platform. So I really just want to drive home, be as questionable or inquisitive about the things that you don't know in this space as possible, because there's so much to learn, right? And don't be overwhelmed by it. I think I had a moment where I felt overwhelmed in not understanding the technical aspect of it, but you don't actually need to know how the wires are crossed to say that this is something that has a lot of potential. So, just trying to make sure that I learn as much as possible. I use the business practices that I've learned in the past, right, and apply it, but also understand that this is a new scale that, new possibilities can be created from.
I love that. Thank you so much for just your encouragement. I think you're right. It's like, we just got to get in and get our feet wet. Like, you just got to get in here and get your hands dirty. And I love how you're sharing, right? There's so much in front of us that even if you're just now hearing this information for the first time today, like, it is not too late. Get in there, get started. Get on Twitter, get on the discourse. Don't be afraid to learn and get in and get dirty. I love that, Ryan. Look, we're going to transition here. And as we get ready to wrap up, is there any other things that you want to share with us that are on your heart? I would love to know. This is just kind of a question. I'm like, Ryan's got his little avatar on Instagram. Where are you at in the world? Are you in Horizon Worlds? Are you in Decentralization? Where are you at in the metaverse and using this avatar? Talk to us maybe about some of the worlds that you're in or that you like, and platforms on that side as well too. And then, of course, leave us with any last words or information.
Yeah. I mean, I'm any and everywhere. I love Horizon Worlds, obviously. It's been so fun just kind of exploring all of the different worlds that are being created. And I think, you've seen this, the use cases that are now being implemented in regards to storytelling, right? Being able to now actualize and creatively show and narrate a story is impactful, especially for Black and brown people who have such a rich history and so many stories to tell. We're natural storytellers. And so now being able to show that in a new format is so impactful. So I think Horizon Worlds is great for that. Venues is another platform under the Horizons ecosystem, but also, I mentioned Decentraland. I love the thought of having this portal that you're able to now contribute and also reward from based on your contributions, but also being able to go in and see the new brand experiences that are happening, right? It's a new way for brands to really engage. And so as a brand marketer, that's interesting to me. Thinking about narratives and what companies stand for right now, those are the biggest things that we're able to really give across in this ecosystem. So I'm really bullish on, what Decentraland can bring. I heard someone reference Decentraland as having the possibility to be the future Google, right? Which really kind of was mind blowing to me because yes, instead of a traditional website, I can now go to a plot of land and now I am on that company experience, whatever that may be, right? Whether that's retail, which we've seen fashion in the metaverse has really taken off with, Decentraland had a fashion week a few weeks ago. So, there are new experiences and new ways that we're now engaging with those experiences that I think that this platforms like Horizons, Worlds, and Decentraland bring.
Yeah, it's powerful because even as you're saying, it's these brands are now creating these spaces, and instead of being on the website, you're in the website, you're in the brand experience, which I think is so important even for Black and Brown people, like that we create these experiences, but then also the creators, come in and help to create, facilitate. It's so many places that we can be and so many things that we can do. And Ryan, I love that you're giving us some new insight on how to be able to see this and wrap our minds around all of it. And even the different pieces of the ecosystem that we may not be thinking about that aren't so shiny and flashy and maybe a part of the very, very forefront of the conversation. If we're hidden in these silos, you're now unpacking that for us. And I appreciate that so much. So Ryan, listen, thank you so much for being here. Any last words that you have for the Black and Brown community as we get out of here today? And of course, please make sure that you let us know what projects you're working on and things. Now you mentioned the HBCU project, but anything else that you want to share and our community tap in with?
Yeah, for sure. Again, thank you for having me. You can follow me, RJ Boyd, on Instagram, and I think King Boyd on Twitter. But again, I think that as we start to build out more of the ecosystem, I think that we'll start to figure out our ways of contribution. So if there's anything that I can help you with, I'm happy to do that. And that goes to anyone else that's watching this. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm always a resource. I love having these conversations. I think that I even unlock different mindsets or different thought patterns as I start having these conversations, because there's just a lot of energy that hasn't been shared around this space so far. So as we continue to share that, I'm happy to be a resource.
All right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. I super, super appreciate it. I know my audience is just full of information and gems. I know we're about to go start some Twitter, some Discords. They're about to take the information and run with it, which I absolutely love. And again, you all, if this was insightful in any way, make sure that you like, comment, share with someone who is either on the fence or maybe not on the fence, just doesn't know, right? And maybe needs some more information, or even someone who is in the space and needs some refresher, some new perspective and insight on how to make all of these things work together. Please share it with them, so that we can make sure that we spread this information to more Black and Brown people, so that we can make sure we're on the front end of the conversation. Ryan, thank you so much again. Blessings to you. Be well, sir. And I'm sure this won't be our last time connecting. And I will see you in the world. I'll see you in the avatar world, metaverse, all the things. In the meantime, be well.